Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this beautiful Monday, October 2nd, 2017. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Harrison.
Here.
Mr. Brady.
Here.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
There is a quorum. Also like the record to reflect that council members Miller and Baker are in attendance.
Always a pleasure to see Mr. Miller and Mrs. Baker. Any public comment related to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If everyone had a chance to review the minutes in their packet, the chair will make a motion for approval.
So moved.
We have any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, minutes have been approved. For the audience today, we're actually going to make a small change. So we're going to have the discussion about the housing plan first, and then we'll go into the item referred to Committee 0169. But I would also like to say, and to the presenters, for those who may not have been a part of forming the actual housing plan, that as the chair, I plan to give the audience who may have questions after the presentation and after council members have spoken, if you hear something and something stands out to you, you would like further clarification, or if you particularly have a question about what we're discussing, then we will allow for members of the audience to ask brief questions after that, all right? So we'll call up Ken Surratt from the Department of Development this morning.
Good morning, Ken Surratt from the County Department of Development. First, thank you all for having this committee. I think that this is, something that many of the people behind me who've been really working and helping develop this plan have been looking for this date to be able to talk to you about what our housing needs are in the community and offer some suggestions on how we could help get there. So just to, I'm going to do a quick background of the plan and kind of how we got to this point. But I think it's best to actually hear from some of the people that helped really create and graft this plan and are out there working in the fields in various areas. So I'll invite them up after that to do some brief discussions on some of the issue areas that have been identified. So it's some of you may know, this, why my position was even created was partially a result to the outreach from the housing community stakeholders as County Executive Budish was coming into office. There was a letter written that asked for signed by 40 different organizations, I think 50 people over 40 different organizations, that asked for two things. One, they want a position to focus on housing, and two, a housing plan. And this is really because in this community, while you hear great stories about recovery all over the country, it's been slower here. You can look at many different metrics and actually see that. It's good. We're moving in the right direction, but again, it's much slower than the rest of the country, and want to be able to focus on increasing the speed of that recovery. And I think you all should take credit for some of this as well, because two specific things. One, the passage of the county demolition program legislation. That was really, I think, the first step towards addressing a large issue in this community, and so you all should take credit for passing that legislation. And secondly, what followed on to that was asking the County Planning Commission to do a study on some of the housing community housing issues and kind of what the market looks like here. I think those both of those are important ingredients into this plan that will be shared with you this morning. So just quickly, after I took this position just over 2 years ago now, I just started meeting with the various county stakeholders that were part of that letter to really try and understand what they felt the issues were. After a few months, and we've since then been on pretty much a regular monthly meeting schedule, we honed in on 6 different issue areas that we felt need to be addressed within this community. The first being access to capital. Due to the economic downturn, the subsequent impact on some of our housing values. Many of our community just couldn't, and bank regulation. Many of our community members really just can't get access to the funds that they need to either purchase new homes or repair the homes in which they're in. A second item, tax collection and delinquency. How this relates to housing is because, unfortunately, the end of this process is foreclosure and, in some cases, demolition. So how do we get ahead of that so that we don't have to spend dollars and actually have people losing their homes through foreclosure and delinquency, through demolition? The third item, housing insecurity. This I define, and there's some Mark McDermott from Enterprise Community Solutions will probably come up later. But my definition of it is two things. One, how do we make sure there are enough affordable units within our community? So that's really kind of the supply side. And the second part of that is, how do we help boost people's incomes so that there's more affordable to them? The third or fourth issue that was brought up was we call special populations. And in this, you can think of many different special populations, from the reentry population to homeless to veterans to just low income to the disabled. There's so many needs that they need, that they have specific needs that they have in their housing, and it's a growing population. It's particularly one I left out is seniors. By 2030, almost 30% of our constituents within the county will be seniors, 60 and older. So an important population that if we want them to be able to grow older in this community, that we need to address. The fifth item is fair housing. Just as I was taking on this role, and the federal housing urban development passed new legislation regarding fair housing. It's called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, where it basically states that it's not okay just to do nothing. If you don't see fair housing and discrimination decreasing within your community, you need to be actively doing something about it. It's not okay just to say there's no law preventing this kind of discrimination. And then the last item, so to touch back on that fair housing, what this did, I actually see as creating an opportunity for all of the HUD entitlement communities within this county to actually work together and have a more regional approach to fair housing. And then the sixth item is what we call confidence in the housing market. This is one that, to me really sounds like an outcome, but it really is also one of the issues. How do we get people kind of believing in their neighborhood, seeing growth, having that vitality, seeing their property values grow? All that's really kind of captured within that last issue area. So again, for the last 2 years, just really been meeting, and we've had special breakout groups along each of these 6 issue areas to talk about what are ways that we can improve or address these issues. In addition to the plan, we've really been working on kind of more detailed kind of action steps that are really, as one of the stakeholders mentioned, is kind of a wish list of housing needs within this area, and really be trying to vet through those which are the most appropriate to bring forward. But the overall strategies are what you see in the plan. I think the specific tactics and how we address that will be fleshed out and will continually change over time, just as our housing market changes over time. So we want to make sure that it's flexible enough to make sure that we can do those, make those changes. But in the somewhat short term, we last met with the county executive in April of this year. There were a few asks of the housing community, things to really kind of push forward as kind of the priorities for right now. The very first thing, and this is something very relevant to you all and take your guidance on, is formalizing this plan. And I think that starts with this presentation, just making sure you're informed, are able to then provide feedback to us on how to strengthen and improve the plan, and then have some way to kind of recognize it more publicly. The second, at this time, there's some question about federal funding going forward in 2018. There's a long delay in making sure our 2017 funding came in, but there's definitely concerns about it. So shared advocacy and making sure that we are working towards protecting that funding, which is so crucial to especially to those most in need in housing in this community. The third was to introduce and examine some legislation around creating more protected classes so that we can move towards this affirmatively furthering fair housing. And it's really looking at adding protections to those who have vouchers, as well as the LGBTQ community. The fourth item was to take a comprehensive look at home repair and rehab structures and actually try to use this opportunity now where we have multiple banks in the community who have community benefits agreements where they basically obligated funding to addressing some of the needs that we have in this community. So how can we work with the banks, leverage our resources, leverage their resources to address these housing issues, particularly around repair and rehab. Number 5, one of the, I think, areas where we are working on a lot is just cross-county coordination. I think the most recent example of that is in the Health and Human Services Strategic Plan. Permanent supported housing is actually called out there as a priority, as it is in our plan. We want to make sure that we are really integrating the county, breaking down the former silos and making sure that we're actually taking more well-rounded approaches to addressing the issues of our residents. And so working with Health and Human Services, working with economic development, our workforce, are all things that we need to make sure we continue to do. And then last was an ask that council consider a dedicated housing stream or funding for housing. And this is, again, for, I think, 2 reasons. One, because it's a potential threat of the federal funding, but also 2, that it will allow us to serve a broader range of our community. Right now, most of our housing programs are funded with the federal dollars. Even if those remain, we're still only serving a small 51 of the 59 communities with programming. And with more flexible funds, we can, and without all the federal regulation, we can actually do more, innovate more, experiment more to truly address the needs of our constituents. So with that, I want to just talk just quickly about, some things I think since, been working with these housing stakeholders that have gone well. One, I referenced before, the county demolition program has worked great in this community. I think every community that's used it will rave about it, and it's thankful that you all passed that legislation. Number 2, there's actually been, when I first took this job, the tax delinquency and collection was really one of the challenges, and particularly questions about tax lien sales. At this point, I think even some of our biggest critics of past lien sales were happy with how the last one went, and how the collection efforts are currently going. You'll hear more about that now. I think continuing our foreclosure assistance programming, which we actually got money from the Treasurer's Office, another kind of cross-county collaboration, because through our research, with our mortgage foreclosure, which we've been doing for a decade, we found out that the trend is actually tax foreclosure has been one of the issues, rising issues. And so we worked with the treasurer to kind of address a way to do this. So we actually have mixed funding to help with this foreclosure. Continuing down payment assistance program, it's great. We have multiple home repair vehicles, again, just limited in the scope based upon creditworthiness or your income eligibility. I think another big one is, I mentioned permanent supportive housing earlier, and this is where we have made a priority of using some of our federal funds every year for, I can't remember how many years, to actually support the construction of permanent supportive housing units, which is reducing our number of chronically homeless. And that number is just continuing to come down. It was made a priority. We put resources to it, and then we're actually seeing the results of that happen right now, which is great. And then another one I think you all could take kudos for, although it's not directly a housing initiative, is the Community Development Supplemental Grant. Part of the housing and why it's been a focus is actually helping to create broader stronger neighborhoods. And those funds, in this first year are actually starting to do that. So, there's lots of great stuff happening. We're moving towards addressing these issues that I mentioned before. Again, like to receive your feedback and input as we continue to move forward and address all of these housing issues. So with that, I'll pause for if there are any questions, but if not, I'll start bringing up, first I want to bring up Mark McDermott, who serves as kind of the de facto lead of this housing stakeholder group. He's been in the housing community here for, I won't say how long, but highly regarded and works tirelessly on behalf of this community. So he'll give a little bit of their perspective and also then start introducing some of these the housing issues. So,
Any questions from the committee? Yes. Mr. Jones.
Again, thank you for the presentation, Ken. A few questions. Your initial point, first action item was access to capital. Can you give us a little detail as to how you see the implementation of this, providing access to capital?
To the councilman through the chair, there's many different strategies. As I mentioned before, I think the one that could pay off and have the biggest impact is working with the banks that are part of these community benefit agreements. Right now, that's KeyBank, and these are a result of mergers too. KeyBank and Huntington are a result of mergers. It's just one of the classic things banks do is they merge and say, here's how we're going to benefit the community in which we have markets. The other Fifth Third is more for some discriminatory practices, but Pledge are billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars are pledged in these community benefits agreements, and covering all of their markets. But what a group that's actually worked with these bank mergers, a national organization called NCRC, National Council Reinvestment Coalition, National Community Reinvestment Coalition. And they've actually helped kind of a grassroots movement here where there's local stakeholders that are more, this is more their specific area of expertise, and it really does cross over with the housing industry a lot. They have put together an ask to KeyBank where it said these are the products and the things that we need in this community. I talked about home repair loans. Due to credit or home value questions or not having enough equity because, some markets just haven't recovered. We have a lot of people who can't fix up their homes in this community, where, $10,000, $15,000 could put a new roof and, fix their plumbing issues that they're, without those dollars, they're choosing, they can't invest in it. At some point, they don't have the money to maintain their homes. It falls into ruin, And that's when unfortunately, we have to get to that question of, do we demo, do we rehab? So I think working with these banks is probably the strategy that can have the biggest bang for the buck. I think, just kind of relooking at how we do our home repair programming, we definitely do, between 30 and 40 a year here at the county with our federal funds. Are there ways that we can try and leverage that a little bit more? There's organizations like Home Repair Resource Center and Lakewood Alive on the west side who have these basically loan guarantee programs. They provide counseling for people and actually will put up funds to guarantee a portion of a loan so that the bank will make the loan. So here they are leveraging, smaller amounts of money to get the loans, the credit that people need. So could we expand those programs and build upon those? There's communities, again, where, even developers won't even go into because they know they won't get their money back in an appraisal, because, the new houses aren't selling, or rehabbed houses aren't selling for what they would put into a home. So is there a way to help subsidize, developers in order to get into neighborhoods that have potential and markets so that they will actually do more rehabs and new builds in those communities? So those are that's I think the biggest strategy. You'll hear more from, is it Rob, Access to Capital? Oh, Gretchen from NHS, who can talk a little bit more about some of the specifics, but it's a big deal in this community.
So maybe I'll save some of my questions for those, but I'll throw this one out to you
Sure.
now, and you can use a lifeline if necessary.
Okay.
But have you created, or do you intend to, or do you have, or do you intend to create a map that creates the boundaries of these depressed communities, as you mentioned? We certainly have, as a result of the foreclosure crisis, we have communities like the Slavic Village community, minority communities. Mm-hmm. In context of the banks, historically there have been redlining by the banks. There are actual lines. Do you have intention to use the term green line along those same boundaries? But a hard map would certainly help focus the effort.
To the councilman through their chair, honestly, that map's created multiple times over, looking at any metric that you want to talk about with housing. If you want to look at low-income poverty, and some people refer to it as the Cleveland or Cuyahoga Crescent, or C. If you think about even up to Euclid, coming down along the lake, curving down towards, Fairfax, Huff, down around University Circle, back out down towards the, Union, Kinsman, all those neighborhoods, down to the southeast suburbs. I mean, it's real. You look at where we're doing demos, where foreclosures are, where, again, where properties are underwater. Those communities are the most hit. And it's not, again, it's a lot of Cleveland, but there definitely are some of the inner ring suburbs that are still finding their ways out of this, the housing recession. So, the map's there. I think it's, and I think it needs to be prioritized. Just actually this morning I saw an article, Richie Paparian from Cleveland State, who's a demographer. He does a lot about population movement and so forth. And his suggestion is that, looking at migration patterns, looking where demos happened, that we kind of concentrate within areas that are within 2 to 4 miles and 4 to 6 miles of downtown, because that's where populations are starting to come. So I think looking at all of those, all of that data, I think being targeted and thoughtful about how we invest in communities, because I think it looks different in different communities, right? I think in some communities, and we have research that shows that demolition is helps increase values in certain communities, and we have some studies that say rehab and new builds help with the values of the surrounding properties, and both are right. each one of those, the neighborhoods and the impact changes depending on the health of the neighborhood, of the current health of the neighborhood. So the stronger markets, tearing down the one or two bad houses does a great deal for that community and that street and the residents. In some communities, you'll see those actually go with infill and do well. So I think you need a mix. There's many, I think, different tools in the toolbox that we'll need, and which tools we use in each neighborhood is going to look a little bit different. And this is countywide. I mean, we have communities in the outer suburbs that have used the demolition program. I think to great success. So, but nowhere near as heavy as Cleveland, right? So that's the kind of thing. I think we'll have different neighborhoods, the tools we use and the amount that we'll use the tool will look completely different. But you're absolutely right that there's parts of our community, Slavic Village being one of them, Garfield Heights, I mean, that are struggling and haven't quite recovered from the housing challenges.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. We proceed.
So, did Mr. Miller?
Mr. Miller, yes.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Surratt, we have long had in Cuyahoga County a program where the county makes bank deposits, and the bank deposits are used to help make possible low interest loans for home repair, and I hear this program is very successful and well regarded, but not well publicized, and that there's money available. Can you shed any light on this?
To the councilman through the chair, the program you're referring to, we actually have two programs. We call them linked deposit programs. Right. One, the HELP program, the Home Enhancement Loan Program, HELP, and the other is the Heritage Home Program, which is in partnership with the Cleveland Restoration Society. Both work similar in that the county has bought certificates of deposit to basically, and in lieu of interest, basically buys down the interest rate of a homeowner that wants to have repairs done in their homes. And the program has a great history. I think more recently there are some questions about it. And the questions being, one, in periods of low interest rates, it wasn't good for the banks, quite honestly. It's great, they want to participate, but they actually at some points were actually losing money when the interest rates were at their lowest. So we actually have two banks that are no longer making any of those loans. The other challenge is if you look at who's getting those loans. These are both programs. The banks use their typical underwriting metrics in order to give the loan. So if you don't have the credit or you don't have the equity in your home, you can't get access to this program. It's a great program if you can get 3 points down. But where you're seeing it are all the strong markets. That's where it's being used. In areas that we were just discussing with Councilman Jones, they can't get those loans. That's just the reality given the current conditions.
Okay, thank you.
Any more questions from anyone? You can proceed.
All right. I'm going to call up Mark McDermott from Enterprise Community Solutions. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, actually there is a time frame in which I've been working on housing. Mr. Surratt made it sound like it was an eternity. I have more gray hair than he does, but thank you. It's been great. Seriously, we over 40 organizations came together, as Mrs. Surratt mentioned, over 2 years ago, almost 2.5 years ago, and have stuck with this work. And we did it for two reasons. One, because we saw that the need around housing in all types across Cuyahoga County was becoming more of an issue. You know this better than anyone. More of a set of problems, But then secondly, we also saw that the county, because its reach is so broad and works in so many areas, could really have an impact on those issues going forward. And so we thought that having both a position like Mr. Surratt's and also a countywide housing plan would be a good idea. Not a plan that was going to sit on the shelves, right? But a plan that would really be a living document that the executive and the various branches of county government would be invested in, and that county council would be invested in. And that's what we care about. We care about having something that's going to help direct not just existing resources and new resources, but how they can work together in new ways and really be targeted and have impact. And that's why we've stuck with it. So we really view this as the community's plan. And I think you might have gotten, but we can certainly give you a list of all the organizations that have been involved in this over the last 2.5 years. And it's been really in partnership with Mr. Surratt that has made this possible. Ken's been a great partner in kind of figuring this out, moving it forward, figuring out where we could actually get some work done now without waiting for things to be done. And you're already leaders on this, as he's mentioned. And then figuring out where in the near future there might be opportunities. And so we hope the plan highlights that. And we hope that this is really the first of ongoing conversation with this committee, with County Council, as you move forward, especially in your deliberations in a very tight budget, in a very tough budget season. And we know that housing, especially for elderly, for homeless, for folks who need help with their house because they're underwater despite them having done nothing negative in the history of their ownership of their house, for low-income working renters, we need resources to leverage private capital, as was mentioned. So we're excited about this. We think it covers a lot of the bases, and yet we know it's only the beginning. So that's the background, and I hope I gave a sense of that for the last 2.5 years. The piece I'm going to touch on really briefly is around what we end up calling housing insecurity, and really on the need portion here. So what is it? It's the way that housers and folks who work in this industry look at those folks who are paying more than 50% of their income for housing costs, homeowners and renters, more than half of their income on housing costs. And that is a definition that, if you can imagine, puts folks in a very precarious situation. And it's twofold. It's really the cost of housing, but it's also that person's income, that family's income. And it's the combination there. So the solutions really are in both those areas. What can we do about affordable housing, but what can we also do about helping to raise people's entry into the workforce, staying in the workforce, making more money, and being able to afford housing in this market. And we also know, and the research shows, that folks who are housing insecure, very precarious, are put in a situation where other resources don't have as much impact as for somebody who doesn't have to worry about spending so much money on housing, particularly renters. So for example, healthcare is just less effective because people are running around accessing resources. Children fall behind in school. Absolute research that shows this. Workforce folks can't get to job centers trying to enter the workforce. So there's all those kind of, if someone is housing insecure, it puts them in a situation where they can't really move up and out of poverty or move up into a higher paying job because of the challenges that presents. So two last things. One is just, what are the numbers for housing insecurity? In Cuyahoga County, of recent, that number is around it's over 95,000 households. 30% of all renters in Cuyahoga County, and it's both homeowners and renters, but 30% of all renters in Cuyahoga County are housing insecure. But in total, that number is 95,000 households who are paying more than 50% of their income on housing costs. Majority are renters, but it's both homeowners and renters, as you can imagine. And in fact, when you kind of break it down even further, 1 of every 3 housing insecure people are children. So you can imagine the impact on their education, because one of the things we know is that when you're housing insecure, you move around a lot. And therefore, you're changing school to school. And we know the research shows that when you're moving from school to school over the course of the school year, your ability to move forward in your education is greatly impaired. The other thing we know about the numbers is that housing insecurity is on the rise, and this is in the report, that between 2000 and 2013, so a little bit more than a decade, the number of housing insecure households increased by 30%. So that trend, and we could show you a bunch of charts, but happy to give you more research on this. That trend is a hugely upward curve, and it continues to increase because of stagnant wages and increasing housing costs. And we also know finally that the problem is universal, that it affects all family configurations, marital status, age, and even neighborhoods. You know, we could think that in the more, quote, affluent sections of the county, we don't see a lot of housing insecurity, but we see a lot of seniors, in fact, who are in this kind of situation. So the report then talks about what we need to do to try to address housing insecurity. And it's primarily three things, though. One is to increase the availability of affordable housing, right? Secondly is to preserve the affordable housing that's out there. And that's not just subsidized housing, that's a lot of private housing that's affordable. So to preserve that housing. And then third is to find ways to increase folks' incomes. And the county has a beautiful opportunity here because it can work in all those areas across all its departments. So we're very excited about that. And if I may, if I could just finish and hand it off to the next person, I assume, Mr. Chairman, if that, and then you can address this all later. Great. So I think the next person up is Michael Lepley, who's with the Housing Research and Advocacy Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Miller.
To Mr. McDermott, quickly, I would like if you would send the list of all the organizations involved. That would be helpful and interesting. Thank you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yes.
I'd just specifically like to know, at the beginning of your comments, you mentioned that 2.5 years ago, you said 4. I mean, you said 4, or was it more?
If I said 4, that was a mistake.
Oh, okay.
To the councilperson, through the chair, is over 40
Okay,
organizations.
all right, never mind.
Thank you.
And to the committee, before the next presenter come up, we do have a copy of the letter that was initially sent to the executive and to the county Department of Development that list all of the organizations who have been part of this effort developing the housing plan. And so we'll get a copy of that from Ken Surratt. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and Council. My name is Michael Lepley. I'm with the Housing Research and Advocacy Center. We're a fair housing nonprofit here in Cleveland, and I worked on the fair housing section of this plan. So fair housing is the equity piece of this plan, and really it permeates throughout it. Every issue that's going to be talked about today is a fair housing issue because race is a predictor for every problem that this plan tries to address. And that's because we live with the effects of a long history of bigotry and racial segregation in Cuyahoga County. So Cuyahoga County, we're in the top 5 most segregated regions in the United States. Housing discrimination in the rental, sales, and lending markets, it still exists. It runs rampant. If you have a disability or if you have kids, a lot of landlords, they don't want to rent to you. They're trying to keep you out. Those are the 2 most reported forms of discrimination to HUD. If you're an LGBTQ person, in Cuyahoga County, you face discrimination in the rental market 30% of the time. That's 1 in 3 rental units that are unavailable to you. And in a lot of Cuyahoga County, that's still a legal form of discrimination. If you're black, you're being discriminated against 25% of the time in the rental market. That's 1 in 4 units. If you're black or Latino, you're more likely to be denied a mortgage than an equally or even a lesser qualified white person. Or worse, if you live in a majority black or Latino neighborhood, a lot of banks just aren't doing business in your neighborhood. This is happening today in 2017. These are still real issues. If you use a housing subsidy like the Housing Choice Voucher, 9 in 10 landlords won't rent to you, and this is a legal form of discrimination. It excludes 7% of our rental market, mostly African Americans, and it traps the poor in a cycle of poverty, and it perpetuates racial segregation. So this plan calls for increased housing protections for people in Cuyahoga County, and the formation of countywide solutions and partnerships, because these problems cross city boundaries and they require a strong regional partner to implement them. So the solutions that this plan has to address these problems is a countywide fair housing law that's more comprehensive than state and federal law. Forming a regional partnership for fair housing planning, this is what Ken talked about earlier, and this plan is going to take place next year, and it's mandated by HUD. Partnering with CMHA to improve federal housing programs, and supporting fair housing enforcement activities. So if there are no questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, we have a question from Mr. Gallagher.
Each and every thing that you talked about has a remedy.
Yep.
So what are you asking?
To support those remedies.
Create a law that's above and beyond the federal law
Yes.
and the state law?
Yes,
And are we
because
dealing with constitutionality?
no, a lot of cities, so we have 36 cities throughout Cuyahoga County that have fair housing laws that are far more broad than federal and state law. And there's not a constitutional issue with those laws. They protect things like veterans of the Vietnam War, people who are gay, people who are trans. They protect people on the basis of their marital status. They can be very broad.
And the federal and state laws aren't broad?
No, they aren't. They only protect about 8 or 10 classes, and there are lots of people.
Classes, so you're telling me the federal government doesn't protect recognized classes of individuals
Yes,
in housing?
yes. And further, the federal law is pretty weak because there are
Well, regardless if it's weak or not, could you get me those two that are not protected?
yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Be sure to send them to the clerk and to Mr. Surratt so we can disseminate to the rest of the members on council who would like the information. Mr. Miller, yes.
You said there were two things that were the biggest impediments to getting rental units. Could you go over that again? It was children and something else.
Oh, children. So if you have a disability and if you have children, it's called familial status under the federal law. Those are the highest reported bases of discrimination to HUD. There are other bases of discrimination that aren't reportable to HUD because they're not covered by the Federal Fair Housing Act.
And how do you spell your last name and what organization do you work for?
Lepley, Lepley, and I work for the Housing Research and Advocacy Center.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Any more questions from the committee? None. Proceed.
I'm going to introduce Rob Curry, and he's going to talk about confidence in the housing market.
Mr. Curry.
Hey, how you doing? Chairman Hairston, members of the Community Development Committee, and other esteemed council persons. So I work for an organization called CHN Housing Partners. Anybody hear of that? As of 2 weeks ago, it was Cleveland Housing Network, but we changed our name. And one more advertisement. You asked about maps and mortgage access. We're very focused on what I term mortgage deserts in Cranes, Cleveland last week. And it is so real. If you look at the data concerning mortgage loan origination, there are so many census tracts with zero originations from 2013 to 2015. And there's lots of census tracts with very low originations. And lo and behold, it's the map of minority and low-income census tracts, one and the same. So with that, confidence in the housing market, our work group, and by extension, where the proposed plan ended up, it really focuses on sort of three areas, if you might. The first thing is nice job on demolition and home repair, especially in home repairs, even continue to work and expand those efforts. The next thing is all about targeting. And it's a mindset, there's a notion that there's always been two Americas, the America where the economy works for people and the America where the economy does not work for people. Well, as it pertains to housing in Cuyahoga County, there's about 2/3 of the county. The housing market has recovered just fine from the housing crisis of 2008, but about 1/3 of the county, no recovery is in sight. And so the notion from a sort of confidence in the housing market is it gets at targeting, which is partially need-based, where is there not a recovery, which is also a major overlap with minority and low-income census tracts. But it's also where are there strengths, where you can build on those strengths. You can take a university circle and you can push out into the surrounding neighborhoods. So that's the second theme of confidence in the housing market. The third, we felt duty-bound to touch on code enforcement, which is, as the state really gutted the stream of funding going to local municipalities, it didn't help that sort of the estate tax was sort of eliminated, but we have some municipalities who are really, really struggling. What's being cut? Building and housing departments are being cut. And so suburbs that were historically stable are now at risk due to the lack of code enforcement, as well as other forces, like the lack of capital, if you might. So the suggestion is really sort of the county exploring what role it can play in supporting code enforcement at the local level. So those are the three areas, but really, lots of people have said this, but I'll say it again. The county has been making housing policy for as long as the county has been in existence, be it how you go about collecting real estate taxes, delinquencies, foreclosures, you name it, you touch housing every day of the week. So this is sort of a mindset, a roadmap concerning housing. And part of the mindset is there is, in fact, 2 Cuyahoga counties where the housing market is working and where it's not. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Brady.
Mr. Curry, thank you for coming in. You've talked about the 2 Cuyahoga counties, and that's sort of the way you've framed it. So I'd like to talk about it a little bit. Maybe you can help give me some insight on this. This is a part of Cuyahoga County we're pretty familiar with, University Circle. And it's my understanding that in order to attract subsidies for housing in University Circle, that the low-income census tracts have been used to attract those federal resources. Are you familiar with the point I'm trying to make?
No, I'm not.
You're not? Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Or maybe there's someone else with the audience, with the group. Ken, or anyone who believes that they can better answer the question or have some sort of.
I have just been informed, new market tax credits, and you are absolutely right. That's all about low mod census tracts.
Okay. Well, I'd just like to I've always been concerned about housing built primarily for people that are not low income but are built basically on the backs of a status of low income people in the neighborhood.
Yep.
So it's another issue, since we've been talking about so many social justice issues this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gallagher.
When I was on city council in Strongsville, I guess what you would consider more of a stable community. I have never been so politically bloodied in my life as when I tried to put in point of sale inspections and point of rental inspections. I don't know how, from a county side, we could go into a city like Strongsville or any others and try and push them that way if that's what they don't want to do. And to me, that was, if you had the political wherewithal and the ability to withstand such pressures, which going in, I never thought I'd see in my life, but I think you probably know of what I speak. That seems to be the only way as far as inspecting residences and keeping codes enforced, the only way really to do it. And I don't know how we could, on our side right now, go and tell a city how that they'd have to do something like that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm being told, let me just say one comment. I was getting at the core issue, like, I don't know Maple Heights, but I'm using Maple Heights as an example. They've had to basically lay off their entire housing department. So it's far more fundamental than additional point of sale, et cetera. It's like the whole code enforcement infrastructure of some of the poorer municipalities has disappeared with the lack of state funding flowing to municipalities.
So maybe looking like like a regional housing code enforcement group for that spans different communities, because I've heard similar some conversations about that in the past.
Sure, Ken Surratt with the Department of Development. And Mr. Curry is exactly right. It's not necessarily saying to cities that you must have point of sale inspections and so forth. It really is more about the infrastructure, making sure you have the resources in order to just to maintain their housing stock and ability. And so, there's many who just rental properties, just making sure the cycles are able to happen because they have the staff or the tools they need in order to do that. At this point, it's not a suggestion that we would make. And very soon, I will be bringing to you all a proposal specifically regarding code enforcement, how we can help some of our housing, our suburban communities, and moving that forward.
Sure. Thank you. Mr. Gallagher, anything else?
And coming up is Sally Martin from the city of South Euclid to speak about tax collection delinquency.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Actually, I did have one question for Mr. Curry, or
Come on back up.
more of a comment. Again, I have to follow the lead of my council president and the new market tax credits. We clearly know, and University Circle is an excellent example, a beautiful community. I visited, my wife and I, we used this supermarket, but new market tax credits, but it was based off of zip codes. Zip codes where the minority community, the needs of the community that have been so well articulated today. But when we get to the solution creates a University Circle. Again, needed, great facility, but it was built off of all of the problems and concerns that are being addressed today. So when the council president says census tract, what he's saying is the zip code has a economically well-developed area and one that's depressed. And if you don't target, I don't know why I'm teaching, I'm not teaching you, you know already, the majority in this room, the solution has to go where the problem is. And if there is a master plan being laid out, it's those type of problems that need to be addressed by this master plan. Will you say, and you forcefully say, we're not going to just look at the zip code because it has some minority and create a University Circle. We're going to come up with a solution in this master plan that actually impacts where the problem is. And instead of using the zip code, we will drill down and itemize and zero in on where the census tract says the problem is. Is that part of what you all plan to do and bring to us? That's my question.
The competence in the housing market group totally gets that distinction and says amen. And it comes down to sort of the careful targeting. With that, I defer to Mr. Surratt.
I'll take the amen.
Ken Surratt from Department. Mr. Curry hit on the head again. I think, again, it's all about balanced approaches. It's, I think you see communities. I think actually a good example is Detroit Shoreway, where you have market rate housing coming in, $300,000 townhouses, but over the past couple of years, they've also been developing low low income housing as well. And then you have people, investors coming in, fixing up housing and renting. And so that's a community that I think is going to become more stable because it's taking that both and approach, where there's something for the current residents and other future low income residents, but also where you're driving more affluent residents to that neighborhood as well. So I think that kind of strategy is something that's working well in that community. And I think, again, the balance, when I was talking about the tools in the tool belt, it's going to look different in different communities. But
Well, Ken, this problem doesn't affect everybody. So it won't gain the interest and attention of everyone. But if it's something that you care about and the problem and the solution, then you certainly have my support.
I would say this specific issue, yes. Housing, again, I think why we have members, a broad cross-section of council here is because it really does affect everyone. There's some housing issue in every single one of your communities. And I think we want this plan to be comprehensive enough to be able to address all of them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ken.
My remarks will be brief because I think we're running out of time, but I'm Sally Martin. I'm the housing director for the city of South Euclid. I'm also, and for many years, have been the co-chair of the Delinquent Tax and Tax Lien Committee of the Vacant Abandoned Property Action Council. A couple years ago, we published a 125-page paper on tax lien sales, and we've remained every single month engaged on this topic with a variety of volunteer practitioners. There's about 16 of us on the committee. So, why is the issue of tax delinquency and tax collection important? Well, it's a major issue. The reason being, we've seen delinquency in 7 years double in the county. So just residential tax delinquency is now over $250 million, and there's over 35,000 people who are tax delinquent on their property taxes. This is a second wave of the foreclosure crisis. So it's meaning we're not out of the woods. We're going to see more vacant abandoned properties coming our way. And how do we manage it? And the tools that the county has to manage it are limited. So we can foreclose on properties that are tax delinquent. And with increased capacity in the prosecutor's office, that's about 3,000 units a year that can be foreclosed on by the county. There's the option of selling liens, tax liens on these properties, which is in some ways kicking the can down the road. The tax lien purchaser gives the check to the county for the back taxes and then goes and collects on the individuals with 18% interest. And it results in a loss of homes. And again, just like every other conversation we've been having today, it's a racial question too. It has a much more pervasive impact in communities of color. We've also seen in the East inner suburbs like mine, a 44% increase in tax delinquency over the past 7 years. So it affects all of us. And what's going on now, and I think there's a lot of wins in this area. So the county has not been sitting around doing nothing in this regard. There's been tremendous progress. We've managed to, as a county, modify the tax lien contract to make it much more equitable and have fewer disparate impacts. For instance, no one is selling tax liens on homesteaded properties now. So that's a big win. I think further, there's marketing going on with Easy Pay and other things that will make it easier to stay current on your taxes. There's also money coming from the county to the counseling agencies to allow for counseling for those who are tax delinquent, not just those with mortgage problems, and that's made a difference. So we've seen the number of people in payment plans going up, which is a positive win for the county, but we're dealing with some capacity issues. So under I would say under the past administration, the Treasury lost about half of its staff, and those people weren't brought back. So where they had the capacity to do more individual outreach was somewhat lost, under the last administration, starting to be rebuilt somewhat, but obviously resources are limited for that. So they are using an outside collection firm now as well and trying to do some collection activities in that regard. But it is a crisis, and I think the county, certainly the administration gets it, and we've been very pleased with our work with the county treasurer and his staff. And we're going to be doing a bit of a road show coming up here soon. We're going to be going out to mayors and managers. We're going to be going out to first suburbs, talking about best practices. For instance, some of us, quite a few of us now, have passed legislation to not register rental properties that are tax delinquent. And in my community, that's made a tremendous difference. But it takes a lot of outreach from a lot of hands, not just the county, to do this. But we're engaged in the topic. I think it's an integral part of this county's housing plan, and I applaud you for being so proactive. Thank you.
Sally, I'd also like to say, I've seen an increased collaboration in the cities where they have the CDCs, where they have these
Yes.
these other arms of that work along with the municipality who interact with residents each and every day. For example, over in Greater Collinwood, you have Northeast Shores who has set up these task force, these groups, to go out and send letters and knock on doors to talk to people. Listen, here are your options. And the Treasurer, Chris Murray, if I'm correct, has even worked to put publications inside of the community papers and council-matic publications all across the county. And we've seen just from when they call in, well, did you get a letter from us or did you see us on the billboard somewhere? Oh, well, no, actually I saw it and publicized in my councilman's newsletter about how I can get on the month-to-month payment plan. So, that understanding the challenges as it relates to capacity of staff to go out and have that one-on-one or that conversation with people to have that strategic collaboration between these community groups and the Treasurer's Office has really been very impactful in these communities as well.
It has made a big difference.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to call up Diana Saganovich, who is going to be speaking on special populations.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Hairston and
Good morning.
other council members. I'm Diana Saganovich. I'm the Executive Director at Cogswell Hall, which is a supportive housing program on the Near West Side. We've been in existence for 140 years. So we have a long history. I also had 15 years as a member of your Office of Homeless Services Advisory Board, so coming from a couple different perspectives. What we tried to do in this special populations area is cover everything. Everything from homelessness to seniors, from reentry, youth aging out of foster care, veterans. So we brought together and invited over 100 agencies to come together and put together some ideas. I'm going to try to run through the main points quickly, but as you can see, there's a lot of content in this kind of area. One of the main things that everybody was saying across the board is the difficulty they have finding housing for their population that's affordable. And it's difficult in a couple ways. Partly it's the affordability. Partly it's how much income, because most of these people are on some kind of fixed income and therefore don't have the opportunity to increase their income. And partly it's because we don't really have a good resource for finding housing for folks that have special needs. We do have housingcleveland.org, we do have United Way 211, but there's limitations to those systems. It doesn't really allow somebody to research for all the different factors that they need to research for. So, having something where there was one place that landlords could put all their rentals and some place that every worker out there knew that's where they should look and they could find something would go a long way. There's also the issue of accessibility. Accessibility in terms of location. Is it accessible in the sense of, if I have a doctor over here, and I have a counselor here, and I have a social worker there, and I have get to go to a grocery store, or I have to get to my part-time job, is there affordable housing that gets close enough to good public transportation? It's also accessible, as you heard before, as retrofitting houses. We have very few homes in Cleveland where there's one floor living that doesn't have lots of steps coming into it. So for disabled people, for elderly people, these are real issues. And a lot of the redevelopment and the housing development that's going on in these neighborhoods, and I know because I live in Detroit Shoreway, so I will echo that Detroit Shoreway is getting it mostly right in terms of having affordability. But most of what we're building are townhouses. It doesn't help our disabled. It doesn't help our elderly population. And when we redevelop areas like that, when we and we do increase the value of homes, we also price out some of these people, an unintended consequence of that. So we need to pay attention to that kind of balance in terms of things. The other thing is landlords. Landlords who don't understand this population, who are afraid of this population. They don't understand that many people that are re-entering the community from prison have paid their dues and will do just fine as a tenant. They don't understand somebody with a mental illness or a developmental disability. And so we really need some more education with landlords. And that's something maybe the county could help with. As far as, these populations also have unique barriers. So talking about the developmental disability community, there is now a push to move all people from the developmental disability community into more scattered site housing, not to house them all together. That's a great idea. It gives other opportunities for them to interact with other folks in the community. However, again, there's got to be careful of something. How are they going to receive the services that they were receiving in the group home when they're now scattered site, or in the apartment building where the workers could go to one place and see them? How are we going to protect them? And I know about this because we have developmentally disabled people at Cogswell Hall. How are we going to protect them from being preyed upon by unscrupulous people, you know, when they're in a more supportive environment? So those are the kinds of difficulties that come along with some of these changes that we're making that are actually really good changes. There also is, and this was brought up before, a lot of the money that comes into this community for housing for special populations has very narrow rules. The example that I'm most familiar with is permanent supportive housing. Wonderful thing, and I can tell you it's been 10 years. Somebody was asking how long it was. It's been at least 10 years that HUD has been pushing communities to do permanent supportive housing for long-term homeless, disabled people. But that's the group, long-term homeless, disabled people. Their definition of homeless is somebody on the street or in a shelter. So if you're living couch to couch or you're doubled up, you're not homeless according to HUD. And so if you're disabled and you moved in with your aunt because you've lost your housing and you've been living with her for a year and trying to find housing, you're disabled, and you and I would probably think of them as homeless, but they don't qualify for these kinds of things. Plus, there's only a limited amount of money for that. So we need to look at those kinds of things. What can we do? Some people, because of their fixed income, you know, things like a shallow subsidy would help. If there was some way to do some kind of fund that was not a non-capital fund that would take care of all these people that fall through the cracks of all the other federal programs and state programs in this area. The other area in terms of reentry population, we've done some work in this community on reentry, which particularly have targeted men who are reentering from prison. There's not quite the same parity of women who are returning from prison, and that's something that the county could look at and probably easily solve. So the last part, I think, is kind of just a nuance of all of this. People in these situations, people who are coming out of homelessness, veterans who are trying to find housing, folks who have to move from place to place, one of the things that happens is they lose everything because they don't have the ability to take their furnishings that they've gathered with them because they can't pay the moving costs, or they have no way to store things. And so that's another issue that happens. Folks not only have housing insecurity, but they have nothing else that comes with them. So those, I think, were the main points. I tried to do them very quickly. And I'd be happy to answer any questions or...
Any questions from the committee? None at this time.
Okay, thank you.
I believe Gretchen is coming up.
Good morning. I'm Gretchen Bowman. I'm with Neighborhood Housing Services of Greater Cleveland. We're a nonprofit agency focused on home ownership, helping people buy, fix, and keep their homes. We're also a nonprofit lender. I am here today to talk about access to capital. I know some questions have come up about this previously, but one of the things I wanted to point out about the plan is that we can kind of largely group our suggestions into two key areas. The first is to gather, disseminate, and really look at key data that's already available to let us know what is going on both in our markets and our micro markets. So as Mr. Miller pointed out, we have programs that are available, and we need to do a good job of pushing out information about those programs to community partners and constituents. The other thing that we can do is there is already in the lending industry a regulatory burden requiring banks to provide certain information about loan applications, their lending patterns, where they're lending to whom, why they're denying loan applications when they're denied. And so one of the things that has come out of this process is that we have had the opportunity to really carefully review some of this data and see that one of the things that is causing an impediment to access to capital throughout the county actually has to do with collateral. So you can have creditworthy borrowers who are unable to borrow against their homes because of either the condition of the neighborhood or the condition of their home itself, which this causes an issue for home repair. Another hole in the private marketplace, and this might be equally applicable in the suburbs as in Cleveland itself, is that the private market treats borrowers who are looking to borrow for non-owner occupied properties very differently than they would someone who is looking to borrow against the home they live in. So owner occupants are considered to be the lowest risk. Someone like you or I who might own a rental house or two could have a very difficult time borrowing the money necessary to do, a roof repair, a front step repair, or lead abatement of sorts. So we would like to look at all of the existing programming, the federal funds that often come, as was stated before, with lots of strings attached, and see where we can really make some inroads, and then take all of that information and bring it back to our bank partners. We are very lucky in this area that there are a number of large banks in the marketplace here, and we are looking forward to working with them through existing community benefits agreements to try to not only disperse county dollars where they can be best used, but also look for the private sector to enter some areas where they might be able to engage in some lower risk activity. And I'd be happy to answer whatever leftover access to capital questions you had.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Thank you. Not so much of a question, is I just think of my own experience. My family tried to get loans throughout the 80s to build to expand our funeral home. And we went through every bank in this city, you name it, and we called them. We paid money sometimes, didn't hear back from them, and all of those things. And I just remember the frustration on my dad's face when we weren't able to get those dollars. But it wasn't until the city of Cleveland's empowerment zone came in the early 90s, and we reached out to them. They had, again, when I talked about maps, they had boundaries of neighborhoods where banks were not lending. And they came and gave us what was $1 million project. And even in that, there was resistance. And it was Mayor Michael R. White. He's my favorite mayor of all time. and he said, that's my project. He said, if you banks don't lend to this project, and he was talking about ours in particular, he said, if you don't lend to this project, we put our money in your banks, our residents' monies. If you don't lend, we're not going to deposit with you. And that made a change, that made a difference. And First Merit actually was the bank that gave us the loan. And they had rejected us 10 years earlier, but they gave us the loan, and we repaid them in full. So it was a good loan. It was one that it was obviously creditworthy when, in hindsight, looking back after we paid it. And but those were the type of things that are needed, and it's not a simple process. I believe there are people out here in the community that want to work, they want to do better, but it's our job to create the environment for them to do that. New market tax credits, all of those things are the environmental things that if this body has the courage and the expertise and the willingness to change, then I think they'll find the residents will actually make a change in the community.
I think that's right. And I think that especially with regards to banking, there are relative levels of risk. And so sometimes if government can step in and go first, it creates a more stable platform for everyone else to act thereafter. But a couple of things about your story. One thing that has not come up this morning is that much of the housing in Cuyahoga County was built prior to 1920, and much of it many of the inner ring suburbs as well were built out before 1950. So what we're talking about with these maintenance issues and with home repair are oftentimes families who have been in one place for multiple generations and have a strong attachment where they are, like your family did with your family business. And so you're in a situation where you could create a lot of stability just by trying to keep the people who are already there. So the long-term families, the seniors, the 30% of our county population who might be seniors by 2030. In houses built prior to 1920, it is often the case that there is no first floor bathroom. So when you think about seniors trying to age in place and stay in the community they've always been in, that can create a real issue. And if they can't borrow the money to make those necessary health and safety adaptations, that can be an issue as well. Another thing that I had thought to myself I wanted to make sure you knew with regard to the mapping is that we are very lucky here in Northeast Ohio to have Case Western Reserve University right down the street. And they actually have a project where they have a public database that can do a great deal of community development mapping. It's called NeoCanDo, and it is updated pretty much continuously. So you might find some interesting things in there.
If you have that, I would like to see those
Yeah.
maps related to what we're doing. And
Yeah, we can
always
send you a link
it to
for
the
that,
clerk.
yes. Mhm.
Grant Land Bank.
All right, thank you very much.
So, Chair, I apologize for it definitely took longer than I had expected, but hopefully you got some good information out of it. I know there's some follow-up items that I've noted, and we're happy to get back to you. And I don't know, I'll defer to you on if you want to maybe suggest a different way to get written questions to me that I can respond afterwards. I just want to make sure we allow time for the other item on the agenda.
Sure, and I appreciate it. And because this is a discussion that we've been waiting a long time to have, so we want to allow for an additional time. I'm sure our presenters don't mind. It gave them time to get some things together for their plan. But listen, I applaud all of those who have been a part of this effort to get us to this point where we are, to have this draft plan before us. An issue that during our time during the demolition program that we talked about having a formal housing plan, a need for rehab, and talked about so many of the things that we've heard today, and the presenters who've come today and to share a little bit more insight on some of those categories. And for the folks who we did mentioned that we would have time for some questions from the audience. If you would see Ken and some of the presenters after the committee meeting, or you all can meet in the hall while we have the presentation from the next group. And this is just the first step. This is our first meeting. This is our first time getting to know the plan, giving the council members an opportunity to read through it and ask some questions. So any questions that the council members have, we will forward them directly to Department of Development for further clarification. And we will get another committee meeting scheduled so we can continue to further dialogue about this plan and just some issues or concerns, adjustments, revisions to the housing plan. And just again, wanted to thank each and every one of you for coming out this morning to share your ideas, to share your thoughts about how we can move forward together as a county to work on some of these issues that we know that we have to do.
Thank you. And I also echo the comments thanks to all the community members that have been part of this. And
Absolutely.
A lot of time and
A lot of time, a lot of effort.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. If anyone is parked in the garage across the skywalk, make sure you see the clerk to have your parking ticket validated. Madam Clerk, you ready?
Resolution number 2017-0169, authorizing a casino revenue fund loan in the amount not to exceed $250,000 and awarding a casino revenue fund grant in the amount of $500,000 to Northeast Ohio Neighborhood Health Services for the benefit of the new Eastside Market Project located at 10505 St. Clair Avenue.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Or do we have we all set with the presentation? Would Khalil and someone from development like to come up first?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think I'm going to handle this unless you have any specific questions about how development might help with the implementation and the sort of the putting together the loan docs and getting that sort of technical aspect of this together. I can just go through the deal with you now, and then if there are any technical questions about how development handles it going forward, then we can address those.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've got Arthur Fain and Doug Peck here with us today to discuss the project itself, and we've got a presentation set up for that. But before we get there, I wanted to just go through briefly an overview of the deal that we have in front of us. So the new East Side Market is a project that will be redeveloping a building at 105th and St. Clair. The building has been unused since, well, basically for 10 years, for a decade, since 2007. This will be redeveloping that building. Just for some background, the original idea behind the East Side Market was similar to the idea behind the West Side Market, in that there were a variety of vendors that came together and shared responsibility for the communal space, both financial, responsibility for the communal space and upkeep and the expenses of dealing with that space. And what was found is that in that market, it was more of a difficult, in terms of its sustainability, it was more difficult to maintain that model. As you know, if a vendor leaves, then a larger burden for the expense of the space is carried over to the remaining vendors. And so sort of became a snowball effect, and the model did not work at that location. Since then, there's been an attempt to revive the East Side Market because the need for fresh foods and this sort of thing is the need is there in the community. Just the model didn't work. And so the NEON, or the Northeast Ohio Neighborhood Health Services, has put together a proposal to create a singular vendor that would operate the market portion of the East Side Market. So providing, and this is Missoula's Fresh Market, that would operate the grocery portion, the market portion of the East Side Market facility. And this is expanded to include other programming as well. So wellness programming, a demonstration kitchen, Wi-Fi for the community, and that sort of bringing the community into the space in a way that, so it's not just a grocery store, it also provides other community amenities. The project is, the rationale for this position, we went through the Department of Development's process at first in an attempt to figure out what product that the county provides fits, and what we found is that our economic development products don't really fit this model or this type of project as very well. So it wasn't a focus on jobs. It had a different sort of rationale for our participation as a county. This was more of a community development than an economic development project. So I gave three, in this overview, I gave three pieces of rationale for participation, and one of them was addressing the food desert issue. The second was the wellness services in underserved community. And the third is, and I think this is just as important as the first two, the redevelopment of that high impact center in that neighborhood, which has been unproductive and vacant for a decade. So on to the financing, and I think the presenters will go into a little bit more about certain sources of financing, but on the back page here, the second page of my overview, it's on the back. We've got the total cost of the project, which is
approximately $6 million. Our loan amount will be $250,000. And that loan is coupled with a community development grant of $500,000 to bring the total county contribution to $750,000. And of course, it qualifies for the Casino Revenue Fund. I have a listing of the sources and uses. Our contribution, both in the grant and in the loan, are primarily for the equipment that will be used in the market and in the facilities at the East Side Market. So that equipment is where we're getting our collateral, our security. We'll have a lien on that equipment. The interest rate is 2% and just a straight 10-year amortization. If there are any questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
Well, thank you, Khalil. I had an opportunity to read over the document, so I appreciate you further clarify some of the points. Any questions from the committee at this point? Then we can bring up the presenters. And just for the committee, in front of you, you have a packet with some slides. I believe it's from the presentation that we'll see shortly, just about the project and the phases and the scope of what we're seeing here.
Let me say good morning to the chair and to the committee. And on behalf of our development team, particularly the president and CEO of NEON, Mr. Willie Austin, who's here with us this morning, we want to thank you for your participation in this public-private partnership to serve as a revitalization anchor for that portion of the Glenville neighborhood. And I want to also thank the Department of Development for their tirelessly work in helping us to find the right type of lane to travel down in seeking the participation of the county. One thing I would say, though, is that we do see this as a community and / economic development project, not just because of the fact that it's going to revitalize a portion of the community, but the economics is going to come because it's more than a market. And the project entails a number of different capacities and components, one of them being a grocery store that's going to help to eradicate a food desert. The other one is going to be a health and wellness facility that's going to help to eradicate some of the health disparities that the residents of the neighborhood encounter, especially those related to food-related illnesses. The other one is going to be a demonstration kitchen education component that's going to also entail for the community to participate in the community engagement facet. But that is going to be the brain center of the project. The artery is going to extend out to the neighborhoods to help to revitalize housing around the market, those streets infill housing, as well as helping to fix up other houses as we get into phase 2 of it. Hence why I call it a community / economic development project. Our goal was to take the lead in the project and to ask those to come along, as we have already kicked the can down the road, in the form of about $3.8 million coming from NEON on the private side. The city of Cleveland has pitched in close to $1.4 million of their subsidies and amenities. And we also have the state is coming in with $750,000. Hence, we asking the county to do likewise. And we do like the way that this is structured on the county side, but we see this as something that we're all in this together. And with your participation, that means that we will have participation from all levels of the government except the federal as to this date. But as we move into phase 2, we see that being the same thing happening there. So we can really say that we have a comprehensive approach that's going to serve as an oasis to rebuild this particular neighborhood, starting with a grocery store. The idea stemmed from the fact that years ago in the Huff community, we saw that housing was very, very important. And I was glad to be able to be privy to the housing report, because the housing disparity is one thing, but having a balance between housing and commercial has always been which comes first, the chicken or the egg. We weren't able to solve that problem in Huff. And so as we began to approach this particular project, we wanted to lead with the commercial and come back in a different fashion so that we can really serve as a partner in the redevelopment of the northeast portion of the community in a comprehensive fashion. But again, leading from the private side and asking the government to come in as we are seeking to have that public-private partnership. Before we go into the slides, and we're not going to take a lot of your time because I think the story has been told. You've seen a lot of news counts of this project. We know that the presentation and the question that needs to be asked is about jobs. It's about eradicating the food desert. It's about providing health and wellness classes and nutritional opportunities for those residents. But before I have Doug come up and give a 2-minute presentation on the slide, and we'll answer any question, I want to yield to Mr. Austin because he is the man that has been at NEON for 50 years, and he saw a need to expand NEON beyond the borders of the healthcare center. So let me yield and give respect where respect is due. Mr. Austin.
Good morning to the chair and the committee. I think I came down looking to be a spectator this morning, so I don't have any prepared speech, but only to say that as NEON celebrates its 50 years of providing health care in the community, I'm certainly excited to be able to extend our assistance to further development of the community. We provided health care, and it's holistic in its aspects. Northeast Ohio Neighborhood Health Services is the name that we changed to in 1996. Prior to that, Cleveland Neighborhood Health Services, doing business as Huff Norwood. The same organization. We've grown to 7 locations in the East Side and East Cleveland. We provide health care for Job Corps, 3 nursing homes. We have an in-school program in East Cleveland High School. We have a mobile dental van, and we provide a whole range of holistic services. Pediatricians, we have internists, OBGYNs, dentists, podiatry, optometry, dentistry, of course, behavioral health, a plethora of social services designed to do all kinds of supports to the patients who come to provide, receive our services. We have ancillary services to support that in our own in-house pharmacies, x-ray, laboratory, mammography, and I could go on and on with the services, but all designed to provide health care with an emphasis on quality and cost savings to our patients as well as convenience. Last year we saw over 30,000 patients, over 105 encounters. NEON itself has a budget that is upwards of about $25 million annually. And so I think we've been well received in the community. We probably provided income and jobs right now to about 276 employees, most of them out of the community. And over the years, probably thousands of individuals have come through our organization as they've acquired skills and been able to progress into other jobs. We obviously serve as a revolving door in terms of training. Community health centers and federally qualified community health centers were, as you know, brought into existence back in, started in 1965 under the Johnson administration with the focus on war on poverty, the Office of Economic Opportunities. Today we're under Health Resources and Service Administration of the Health and Human Services Department. So that's a quick synopsis and background of what we do. Often the question is asked, well, you're in healthcare, so what does Eastside Market and other development projects have to do with healthcare? Well, as a start, I'll just say maybe we think 10% of what we do in terms of restoring health comes from our physicians and other support services. The rest of it has to do with mental problems, job problems, housing problems, nutritional problems. I think when we started out, we were probably a little ahead of the curve, but you've probably seen a lot of literature and supports now coming out of Washington and other places, including Cleveland, that support that kind of thought process. And so, again, we're just excited to be a part of it. And at that,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
I'll
Austin.
yield to the presenters.
Thank you. We appreciate the information. You know, some of us are familiar with the long term commitment, long time commitment that you and your organization have had in some of the neighborhoods in Cleveland. So we thank you for the information.
Thank you.
Now we have the presentation by Mr. Peck.
Good morning.
Good morning.
One thing that I would like to emphasize is that Mr. Austin is a bit modest in terms of the financial impact of NEON's presence on the east side. The average salary of the employees at NEON is $50,000 a year. It's $50,000 a year at 123rd and Superior, $50,000 a year at 131st and Miles, $50,000 a year on Huff, $50,000 a year in Collinwood. That doesn't happen. It's usually around that major corridors in downtown where you see average salaries of $50,000. And although it's a diverse staff, the majority of staff are minority practitioners who have dedicated their professional lives to taking care of people who live in the neighborhoods that we serve. So I just thought that point needed to be made. Secondly, I would be remiss if I didn't, although I stand before the county body, it's very important to recognize the role that the city of Cleveland has played in this process. We started with the 1-year relief with 3 5-year options with tax abatement. That equates to about an $800,000 contribution to the project besides cash. The cash in terms of the city of Cleveland's contribution totaled about $1.4 million. So when you combine the 1.4 and the $800,000 in tax abatement, that really got us off the dime. And we really appreciate their participation, as we do the county participation. If this is supported, that would take the total public contribution to 2.3. So between $3.8 million private investment that the NEON Merrill Lynch Group is bringing to the table, combined with public contribution, that's how we make a $6.1 million project. So that's the kind of collaboration and public-private partnership that's needed, in particular in commercial neighborhood business districts like Glenville. Neither party could do it alone. I wanted to bring your attention next to the thought process that went behind this. It's appropriate that we're addressing the Community Development Committee, because this is really a comprehensive community development project with a whole lot of economic development components to it. Our logic model talks about all kinds of things that will go into the market to produce a certain amount of outcomes that we believe will contribute to the overall total quality of life of people who visit. We're estimating that 25 to 30,000 residents and visitors who come down to the East Side Market will be impacted in one way or another. We're expecting net profits, high consumer demand, new business growth, improved health, improved wellness, programmatic expansion, improved safety and jobs, and youth and individual entrepreneurial enterprise startups. At the end of the day, we want to be able to say that we improve the health status of individuals, families, and children. We've enhanced the overall total quality of life of the Glenville neighborhood. We've strengthened neighborhood business districts. We've improved safety and the overall condition of the neighborhoods. We served as a stimulus for increased business. We've strengthened community relationships. We've increased economic activity, and we've increased health awareness. all of this is the kind of model we believe is the best practice for how development should take place throughout Cuyahoga County, and in particular underserved communities like Glenville. I've already talked about the distribution of contributions from various sources, how the uses would be distributed, allocated. Obviously, construction is the lion's share, 70% of the proceeds would go to construction, 17% equipment, 14% soft costs. We plan to open, the construction should be completed by the beginning of December and open January 1st. We'll be training our employees and having open houses to bring community stakeholders into the group throughout the holiday season. And by January, we'll be ready to launch 100% operations. 100% of operations will be launched. So at this time, I'll conclude. Arthur made me stick to 2 minutes. I think I went to 2 minutes and 3 seconds. Forgive me. If there are any questions, we'd be glad to answer them at this time.
Any questions from the committee? Mr. Brady?
Yes, I know that our staff member Khalil Sarin answered some of these questions, and it may be necessary for someone, but I see you've got a lot of contributions, both private and public. I'm trying to drill down on exactly how the amount that's being requested from the county specifically will be used. I heard Khalil say something about equipment, but if somebody could just clarify where the money that we're looking at appropriating, would be used.
To the president, through the chair, you're absolutely correct, and Khalil adequately spelled out that the funds will be used for equipment.
Okay, all right. This is equipment for the market itself?
Yes, equipment such as coolers, as well as backup point-of-sale equipment and the coolers and cash registers, as well as the shelves.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any questions from the committee? Mr.
I
Jones?
don't know if it was said, do we have a timeline for the project?
The construction will be completed by December, beginning of December of 2017.
Okay.
Doors will open January 2000.
And see in the packet, a project status. It kind of has a project phase, concept, pre-development, development, pre-construction, construction, operations, and performance. And it gives, I believe, the completion date, launch of the comprehensive community initiative, the workforce, job training. I believe it spells it out in the project, from what I see. If there's something additional you'd like to add.
I would. One of the things that I want to note is that while we're excited about the opportunity to have a grocery store, we're excited about the health and nutrition. We're also excited about the community program. One of the things as a collateral benefit that has come about is that Huntington has opened a branch inside of the plaza because of us opening up the market. And I understand that Charter Bank is going to open a branch inside of the plaza as well. There's other businesses that is contacting us about our opening date because they want to bring some other business into the plaza. So that's why we see this as an economic impact project as well as community benefits program.
Thank you. Mr. Fain, can you talk about the number of jobs that'll be created out of this? I understand that, this is more of a community benefit, but I think it's important too to talk about the number of jobs that'll be created out of the project as well.
Yes, we're going to have 44 jobs that's going to be created inside of the market as well as the nutritional clinic. And we also have another component of this called the Eastside Market 2.0. And 2.0 is where we use the market as a brain center and create other arteries into the senior facilities and have seniors serve as a customer service reps for those seniors to be able to get access to food on a delivery system. But Doug, you can elaborate a little bit more about those jobs.
We anticipate another 120 jobs created just from our delivery system. As you know, that's part of what the new e-commerce solution is in terms of delivery with the group that's coming at what is the company called? That's buying distribution.
Amazon?
Amazon. We're using the same model as Amazon, but we're doing it on a different level at the Eastside Market. We're going to be bringing in youth who will be assigned senior towers. So some of the seniors who are sick and shut in and can't get down to the market will be using youth to actually deliver groceries using technology and swiping the EBT card. Seniors who live in those senior towers will be working from the senior towers and be responsible for collecting information and sharing information about buying and groceries and produce and having those kinds of things delivered. They will send the order directly to the Eastside Market. The Eastside Market will dispatch youth to those various areas. This is the same model that we're going to use in Bracknell. The towers in Bracknell and a lot of the residents in Bracknell would like to take part in that delivery system, as well as the faith-based community up and down East 105th. It's going to be, we've already received commitments from all over the county, from Bedford, East Cleveland, all the way down over to Bracknell, where the delivery system will create multiple jobs. We're also going to be providing a lot of jobs through the hiring of subcontractors and partnering with Tri-C with the demonstration kitchen, because we'll be taking demonstration cooks and chefs who will be presenting classes to off-site at the demonstration kitchen and hiring class participants to actually learn how to cook and to join these smaller neighborhood business restaurants, neighborhood-based restaurants, learning how to cook from the demonstration kitchen. And then we're also going to be preparing youth and working with Collinwood and Glenville students to provide off-site home economics training, so that students can take classes off-site at the demonstration kitchen and prepare themselves for careers beyond high school that may not include college prep.
Thank you. Well, it sounds like you guys have some grand plans after you get the market open and get those 40-plus people hired into the market. So it's good to hear about what you're looking to do in the future. Now, I know a little bit about Missoula markets. They've been around for quite some time, have run sort of some high-end grocery stores in some of the other communities. Can you briefly touch on, because we're pressed for time now, but can you briefly touch on the operator of the facility who operate Eastside Market?
To the chairman, to the committee, yes, in putting together a project like this, it takes some creativity, not on the financial side, but creativity and the willingness and the desire for people to want to give back. About 4 years ago, Missoulas live in Aurora, where I live, and Missoulas have 2 stores, one in Bainbridge and one in Aurora. We shop there, and I approached them about partnering with us on this project, because we knew that we needed somebody that had a history of delivering quality and customer service, and they're second to none in the Aurora and Bainbridge area. And in talking to the owners, Brad and Brooke, and working with them and getting them to buy into what it is that we're trying to do in the city of Cleveland, they agreed to come and be the operator / owner of the market side of the business. And so it's something that we've watched. We vetted them for years. I've been out in Aurora for 16 years, and so I've been watching them, and not only shopping there, but watching the way that they deliver their customer service and the products that they deliver. We talked to them about modifying it to fit our clientele that's in the inner city, so that we do not have the high-end prices that we see sometimes in the suburbs, second ring area, and they've agreed to do that, and so we have a partnership that we know is going to be second to none.
And that's where they started.
And it's, in fact, they started 30 years ago in the city of Cleveland. They moved back out to the suburbs about 20 years ago.
Sure, and I've heard from one of the I guess management level folks there how this is exciting for them too, because it allowed them to come back into the city, a place where they once started, and to kind of help transform a neighborhood that has been left untouched for quite some time. And just for the committee looking at this project, there's a new initiative called Thrive 105, and so this project, serving on the north end of 105th Street, lends to that overall commitment by the city of Cleveland and the other levels of government to kind of revitalize that Glenville neighborhood, or that East 105th corridor. So having this project that anchor that end of 105th Street would do nothing but lend to the well, at least we hope will lend to the creation of other economic opportunities, other community development opportunities within the area that has again been left untouched for quite some time. Is there any other questions from the committee? Yes, Ms. Baker.
Thank you, and I hope this wasn't asked already, but the, this has been closed since 2007, so how old is this structure that you're working with?
Open in, I think, 19, I don't want to misquote, but I think it was open in like 1980 something. It's
So,
about 25 years old.
About 25. The work that's being done for the construction of 4-point-something million, I think I saw, 4.2 million, is that all due to renovation inside, or what kind of work is needed? Is that, you're confident that 4.2 million will do the outstructure, the roofing, HVACs, all that are involved in bringing this building of 25 years old back to a state where it's a state-of-the-art facility?
To the president, to the committee, again, as we looked at our operator, someone with history and someone that know how to operate a grocery store, we did the same thing when we went out looking for a construction company. And A.M. Higley has a deep-rooted commitment to the city of Cleveland and a long history of successful, not only renovation, but construction projects. The total construction cost, to be exact, is about 3.8 with a contingency of about $700,000 in case there's some overruns. But one of the problems that this building had, and one of the reasons why it closed down, is because there was a smell that permeated this building, and the residents thought that smell was from food that was just no good. What we found is that the piping that was inside of the building needed to be taken up. So we've taken up all of the piping. We're putting in new state-of-the-art, not only IV and AV equipment, but also all of the piping and the electrical and the roof. All of those things have been replaced, and it's going to have a facade that you see on the front of your handout that's going to make it fit right into the neighborhood and the existing structures. So yes, to your question.
So, okay, so if I just.
Sure.
So the 4.2 or the 3.8 plus contingencies that you believe is going to get you to the end of the year and be a striking and state-of-the-art facility, including all that is needed?
Yes.
Inside and out?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I believe both Councilman Miller and I were both on the Cleveland City Council when the East Side Market was launched. And I believe it was sometime in the early 90s, is the way I recall it. And there has been and I've been out to the area, I've seen the plaza. If you're trying to sort of understand the scale of this, it's not on this scale. The West Side Market was referenced earlier. It's not on that kind of a scale. It's a much smaller structure than that, just to get a sense of that part of it. But for the last decade, and I know you gentlemen have been working a long time, for the last decade, it has been a goal of the community that this market would be restored and not just left to be a wasteland, another dead plaza, another commercial wasteland, a failure in an area that so badly needs help and community redevelopment. So I'm just strongly in favor of this project, given all the buy-in that you've gotten from so many people, and I can only imagine how many meetings that you've been in over all of this time. And so we are just helping finish off what has been ongoing for quite some time, and I'm glad that we're in a position to do that.
Just a quick comment that I know this is a really big deal, that it provides a very basic and foundational neighborhood need that's important for the health, wellness, and economic well-being of the community, and I wish you all the success in the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Seeing no other questions from the committee, Khalil, can you come up for a second? So my understanding that there's a request for second reading suspension, correct? So that way we can continue, we can I guess, so that they can meet their deadlines. Part of it being the equipment order have to be within a certain period, et cetera, correct?
Yeah, and there are still some processes that we need to get through with development on that technical, sort of the loan agreement and the grant agreement.
To have
side
enough
of it.
time.
We want to make sure that we have enough time to get those agreements done and make those orders.
Okay. Thank you. So, Clerk, the request is for a second reading suspension, and I believe Mr. Brady's indicated the motion for second reading.
Yes, I move.
We have a second from Mr. Gallagher. Any discussion from the committee? Seeing none, all in favor? Sorry, Mr.
Oh,
Mr.
I
Jones.
just wanted to add my name to this project.
All right,
That's
please
all.
add
I'm
Mr. Jones'
being-
name to the,
name as well.
add Mr. Brady's name as well, add Mr. Gallagher as well.
And I'll say this before we vote. I grew up on 108th in St. Clair. Well, when we first moved to Cleveland, that's where we lived. And so we were a block from this plaza. And this is an incredible project and it's so well needed. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you so much. Madam Clerk, do we have any miscellaneous business? Any other public comment?
No, Mr. Chair, no one
All
has
right.
signed in.
Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.